Welcome to the Inside Pitch. I'm Christopher Lockhart, the creator and administrator of this Facebook group where screenwriters, creatives, filmmakers meet to ask and answer questions and exchange ideas and information on the craft and business of movie making. As always, I am joined by my co-host, who is also our group's co-administrator, the super sexy Rameses. Ramesh, you're a very sexy man.
Yeah,
I have to say.
You're
speechless.
I know, I am. I don't think any woman has called me that. So, hey.
Oh, come on. Well, listen, you got to see me when I'm all dolled up on Thursday nights. All right, so we are here today. This is not a live interview, no. So this is coming to our group, previously recorded.
Right.
And Ramesh, as always, I'm going to ask you to do the introduction right after. I also thank our other co-administrator, Steve Enlow. And we thank him each time because we're so glad that he doesn't take part in this. So Steve, we are thanking you for not being here, because having to have another talking head would just really be obnoxious. But we do thank you for all your work, and of course for all of the tippers who come to the, is it a board? It's a group. What do you call it? It's a page?
It's a group. Yeah.
Okay. Who come to the group every day, all 13,100 of you who visit and participate and share information with each other. Okay, Ramesh, you have the floor.
Okay, our guest is David Wappel, a screenwriter. Originally from North Carolina, he previously worked in post-production in Atlanta before pivoting to writing. His original work often includes themes of private courage, reluctant leadership, and pangs for childhood. You can see his work on HBO Max in the film Long Gone By, and on Amazon Prime in the documentary Quest of the Muscle Nerd. His spec script, The Last Farm, was a semi-finalist at the 2019 Austin Film Festival in the Humanities category, as well as an ISA Fellowship finalist for Stowe Story Labs. He also works as a story analyst for multiple management and production companies, as well as one-on-one with writers. And we're not talking about screenwriting, he's probably talking about Middle-earth, Shakespeare, or sailing. David, welcome to the Inside Pitch.
Hey
David.
You. Hi.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It is a Friday here for us, so we are very appreciative that you took some time out of your Friday afternoon to talk to us, just plain little old us. So you started in post. Why would you leave such a good, lucrative, reliable work to be a screenwriter?
Yeah, I think it's because I really just got into post as a way of probably avoiding what I really wanted to do, which I think was writing. Actually, I first thought I wanted to be a cinematographer. That's what I studied in school, in production. And then I realized a lot of the decisions that I thought a cinematographer would make, a director was actually making. So I was like, oh, maybe I want to go into directing. So I read some books and took some classes on that, and had my little senior thesis film. And I was like, this is a lot of work, but my favorite part was in the editing room. I was like, maybe I want to do that. And I learned to.
Oops.
All right, we'll give him a second. We're not live. I'll just cut this. I don't know if you can hear us or not. But David, you have stopped.
Yeah,
you stopped moving. You froze. He might drop out and come back.
Yes.
You want to send him? You want to send him a message?
Yeah, I'm just sending him a message.
Okay. Hey, we've had this happen live.
Exactly.
We had with Shane, remember? He dropped out a few times.
Right.
Okay, he's gone, so he'll come back.
Yeah.
I'll do a little singing.
We actually finally have warm weather here. I went out, no jacket, just a t-shirt.
Very nice. Well, spring is right around the corner. Easter is a couple of weeks, right?
Yeah, that's right. When is Easter?
I think it's the first Sunday of April.
Is it? Oh, wow, it's early
Yeah,
this time.
it is a little early this year, yeah. Let's see. So what's going on? You know what I got to read? I got to read a couple of episodes for the next season of The Boys.
Oh, are they good? Are they
Which
good?
is a show that I love.
I do too. I started watching it, and it's really good. I'm like, I think I have like 2 more episodes left of the first season.
They want Albert Brooks to play a role.
Oh, okay.
So I got to read 2 episodes. So I know a little bit about what's I know what's going to happen next season.
So that's right. They've started filming in Toronto.
So I guess now that I know, for instance, I know who Homelander's father is.
No.
I'm not going to tell you, but I know. So it's very interesting. You know, we're going to need to try to figure out where he left off. Where did he leave off when he was talking? He was talking about being an editor, being a director.
Right.
Should we just start it from the beginning, maybe?
Yeah, we can just introduce. We don't have to introduce him again, but we can just.
I don't know. We might have to. Here he is. Oh, but I got no picture of him yet. There he is. He's back. He's back.
My God.
Yeah.
Wow.
Back in day. You were like Mr. Freeze. You just froze up.
Yeah.
You know, it happened to Shane Black. It happened to Shane Black twice live.
I know.
And then he went off. He had a cigarette. You know. All right, so you can hear us okay?
I'm good.
Yeah,
I can hear you good. I'm just
okay, good.
I'm so scared of it happening again.
Oh no.
But you know what I would suggest, if it is possible, if you have an Ethernet cable, I would suggest to use that and not Wi-Fi. If you don't, well, then there's nothing we can do about it. That's all right.
Yeah, I unfortunately do not.
Right, that's all right. All right. So let's just figure out. I'll just edit all this out later on. Again, no big deal. We're not live. I love not being live. So, all right. Do you want to just pick it up? You want to maybe just answer the question again?
Sure.
Which was, you know, why leave Post?
Why leave the cushy life of Post? Yeah.
Correct. All right. So why don't you just give it a short pause, so it'll be easier for me to cut, and then just answer the question. And Ramesh. Yes. Look up at the screen, because we're all looking at the screen before.
Okay.
Just for a second, and then you can go back and read your text.
Oh, no. I was just making sure of something. So.
Okay. We're back.
Okay.
So I think I got into writing really because I realized I was doing a lot of it in post, and that was what I really enjoyed the most. I always say that post-production is like writing, but you only have so many words in front of you that you're allowed to use. And there were so many that I was like, oh, I wish we had this shot, or I wish we had this moment, I wish we had this. And I was kind of trying to write from the other end of the pipeline, so to speak. And I was like, you know what? I think I want to go to the front, and start there. I was much more interested in storytelling than I realized. I thought I was way more interested in production and just the technical aspect of putting something together. But I realized that I had some creative muscles that weren't quite being flexed in post-production that I had been flexing in college a bit. And I was like, maybe that is what I want to go into. So I made the pivot and got into writing. But I do miss the cushy post lifestyle sometimes. It is really nice.
You know, the thing that I love about Post is that it is a challenge, right? It's when you're writing a script, you really do have the entire world at your disposal if you need to make changes. But in Post, unless you have a big budget to where you can go out and do reshoots, you're sort of stuck pretty much with what you have, and you have to try to figure out how to make that work. And I always find that to be a really fun challenge.
It is. It's totally. I think a grass is always greener situation, because there's so many times where now I'm just like, this character could do anything, could go anywhere. Like what, you know, and just kind of the paralysis of just the open-endedness of it. Where in post there was something great where it's like, what shots do I have? What? All right, cool. That's it. Cool. Like you can move so much more quickly because you have the things to a degree decided for you like that. And so I do miss that. And of course, as soon as I get, you know, in front of an edit bay, I'm probably going to be like, I only have these 3 shots. You know, we should have done this. And it's like, I'm sure they thought of that, but just, you know, there are reasons that you have to shoot what you shoot. So it's totally the grass is always greener situation for me.
Well, films truly are written in the editing room. There's just, you know, screenplays are written on the word processor, but films are written in the editing room. And I always think it's great if a writer can be present during that process. They're often not, unless it's a very small project. But there's so much to learn in the editing bay. So much to learn. Now you're fairly new. I mean, you're much more at the beginning of your journey. And so talk a little bit about the beginning of your journey and sort of where you're at, what the sort of ups and downs are, what your struggles are, because I think a lot of our members will be able to relate to that. Sure,
yeah. No, I'm very much at the start of my journey. At least I hope. But yeah, I've see for probably only about 4 to 5 years now, depending on kind of how you define serious. And it wasn't until, I almost said last year, but it was the year before, just because it feels like this past year has been a blur. But that I started getting some real traction on my career, and that was in the not winning, but being a semifinalist in Austin. And then I wrote Long Gone By. I wrote the screenplay for Long Gone By right before I got that Austin placement, and that was just from a connection of people that I'd worked with in Atlanta in post-production. They were actually set designers, and they had a documentary I worked on, that's Quest of the Muscle Nerd. I worked on that, and then they said, "Hey, you're moving to LA, right?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm going to pursue writing." They said, "Well, you should hook up with our friend Andrew. He's out there and he's making movies." And so we had this casual coffee, and that turned into the project that eventually became Long Gone By. And so it was very strange where I wrote this screenplay for this director who had already had a draft, and I did a rewrite, not knowing it would go anywhere. And then I get a placement in Austin on my spec that year. And then 2 years later, the movie comes out on HBO Max, and it was like, oh yeah, it was the first time for me that I'd gotten anything of mine released. And it was really nice to kind of feel that, because when you're in the tunnel, I'm just not used to the career yet, where it's like the pipeline is so long from when stuff is written to when it comes out, that I was like, nothing's happening for me. I have nothing going on. I wrote this movie and I have this spec that's doing well, but like, what does well mean in contests? And I don't know. And it's just, it's a very much a long game. And so I finally had what I felt this past year was my first success in seeing the long game play out successfully in a project, because so many of them don't play out, and they just don't get that far. And so that was the first time I really understood, like, oh, okay, this truly is a marathon career. And it was really good. And so I'm just hoping that, you know, a couple years from now I'll be feeling it again, or hopefully sometime soon.
So contests are often maligned, but let's talk just a little bit about your experience with the Austin, and perhaps how it put you on the path, how it helped in any way, even if it was just an intrinsic sort of experience. What was Austin about for you?
Yeah, for me, it was really attending and being there. I felt like I got more from that than placing in competition. I had gotten through the second round with another script like the year before, but I'd never made like quarterfinals or semifinals or anything. And so when I made semifinals, I was like, well, I should go attend this year. And so I went, and being there and surrounding yourself with other people that are exactly, you know, in the same position as you, as close to anyone can be, as being kind of where you are, for me was just so helpful. And when I think back to, you know, going to the festival and attending, I remember, you know, some of the panels, and I remember some of the tips and tricks and stuff that was said. But what I remember most is the conversations at the bar and at the taco stands and with other writers at and around my level, more than connecting with sort of any producers or managers or anything like that, which does happen. And the semifinals placement did help in that regard. But what I got out of it more was just the connecting with other peers. And a lot of those relationships I still have today. And some of them have led to real opportunities. Others are just still great friendships. And maybe someday down the road, they will lead to great opportunities, which is awesome. But really, I now feel like, oh, I'm not in this alone, which as a primarily a feature writer, sometimes I do feel a little bit that way. You know, I'm mostly writing alone.
Yeah, clearly it's all about networking and who you know. And so I think the fact that the Austin contest does have this this conference attached to it that Ramesh and many of our Inside Pitch members have gone to in the past, it's where a lot of people know each other from. Mm-hmm. Yes, Ramesh?
Yes, yeah. Some of my best friendships have been made come from the Austin Film Festival.
David, are there other contests that you recommend for screenwriters?
Other contests, there are not any that I recommend more than others. It's not that I don't recommend any, but just I don't have too strong opinions about recommending any. I did, as Ramesh said in my little intro bio there, I did attend Stowe Story Labs, and similar to Austin, the connection with other writers, being able to be present and be there and in the room with others, that was really great. So I had a great time there at that experience as well. And
what is
my best friend
Story Labs? I'm sorry for interrupting, but what is the Stowe Story Labs? Can you tell us?
Yeah, and I hope I represent them right. But the one I went to was the Fall Lab, and I think they do a few throughout the year. And I went to Stowe, Vermont, which was I think it was two flights and then a rental car to get up there in the fall, and it was just lovely. In a very small town, very much like Stars Hollow from Gilmore Girls, and basically a bunch of writers from all over, from California, they were from New York, and really from all over the country, and a few international as well. Just meet up for a weekend of basically peer reviews, and there's a couple panels, but mostly it's peer groups and peer reviews. And you're just talking with other writers, and we also got a good amount of pitching practice there as well. So it was like a 3-day, 4-day experience, and it was really wonderful. I'm in touch with a lot of people that I met there.
So it sounds like it was a good experience for you.
Yeah, it was great.
Good, Mr. Ramesh, do you have a question for David?
Yeah. Can you talk about, let's talk about your work in production and working in post. Did that teach you anything about screenwriting at all, if anything?
Yeah, totally. I mean, one of the things that's great, especially about post-production, is that you have kind of an insight to everything that came before. And maybe you don't know how it happened, but you see the results of it. One of the great things about post is you have the film, or whatever project you're working on, you have the raw materials there in a way that in screenwriting you don't at all. But so you can see what was made, and more specifically what wasn't, that you maybe wished was. And so it really helped me think through all the way to the end of the project of, you know, I when I'm writing, I feel like even subconsciously I'm always thinking like, what will the editor need? And so I tend to maybe be a little bit over prescriptive in putting certain sort of shots in there. You know, I might give a character a reaction that might not really be needed in the screenplay, but I'm like, I'm going to make sure that the editor gets that shot, or at least I'm going to do my best chance to make sure that, hey, we want to see the supporting character's reaction because they have the strongest opinion about what was just said by that character. And so it really helped me in that regard.
Okay.
Ramesh, you met David in an interesting way. So why don't you just tell that story, and then maybe it can segue into David talking about the experience of his film.
Okay. Yeah, actually, I was flicking through HBO one day, and I came across this film called Long Gone By, and I looked at the synopsis. Looked interesting. If there's a film about immigrants, I'm watching. So I watched it, and it's really good. I'm not kidding. It's one of my favorite films from last year. And so I just sort of Googled him and realized he had a Twitter account. And then I messaged him through Twitter and just told him, hey, I usually don't do this, like message strangers, but just want to let you know that I saw this film and it's really good. And it's a lot, you know, I really enjoyed it. And that's how we sort of started chatting. And then
David, why in your right mind did you respond to Ramesh?
Because he was so generous and thoughtful. You know, I try to be open and available online as much as I can. And so many messages I get are pretty, you know, curt and just you know, hey, take a look at here's a link to my short film, or will you read my script? I probably get will you read my script more than anything. But the message from Ramesh was just so thoughtful. He not only said, I saw your film, I liked your film, which I mean is always helpful. Always say you like it. But he was really specific in his feedback, what he liked about it, what he responded to. And so as a writer, it's like that's all the stuff that we're trying to put in, right? So I can't help but respond with, yes, thank you. I'm so glad that resonated with you. Because it's hard to do. It's like you know, it's like that took me work to try to do that, put that in there. And I'm sure it sounds like I'm taking credit for all of it, but for my contribution, I was like, I did want to put that in there, and I'm glad it translated. You know, the filmmakers were able to get that through and everything, and so you can't help but respond to, I think, just genuine, thoughtful messages. And I never felt like Ramesh was trying to get anything out of me, and that's I think a big thing as well. He was very respectful.
Yeah, but look at where you are now.
That's true. That's true.
So it looks like he did get something out of you, huh?
He
Sucker.
played the long game.
Exactly. But how did you? Can you talk about Long Gone By and how? I know you said you know it was a meeting you had in LA, but how did you get into it, and you know, what work did you do on it, and just sort of the whole process of, you know, just making sure that deal happened, and because you know, how you sort of went through that whole process from the time you met.
Yeah, the director, Andrew Morgan, he was a mutual friend of some people that I had known in Atlanta. And so when I moved to LA, they put me in touch with them, and we played, I guess it's not phone tag, but sort of like coffee tag, like meetings, you know, for probably like 10 months of like, oh yeah, can you do this week? Oh, hey man, I gotta postpone because I got this going on. And I was like, yeah, no problem. And then I would have to push because something was going on. So it took a while, and because there was no specific project for this meeting, you know, it kept kind of getting pushed, and finally we were able to hang out and just, you know, we were sharing about what was going on, and he's like, well, actually, I'm in pre-production on this movie, and I didn't even know what it was called at that point. I don't even know if he had a title, but it would eventually be Long Gone By. But we were talking about it, and he's like, yeah, and I wrote a few drafts, and he was just tinkering with the problem in the opening, and so I gave him my 2 cents there, and he was like, yeah, that's really, really helpful. And then about 2 days later, he called me, and he's like, you know, just the way you're talking about it, and you just really kind of unlocked that opening for me. And I think would you be interested in doing a rewrite? And I was like, yeah, totally, definitely. So we talked a little bit more about what that would mean, what that would entail, and I ended up doing not quite a page one rewrite, but close to it. We worked on an outline together. I was basically following most of his outline, but I sort of moved a few things around. I like to say that I very much came in as a carpenter on that project. You know, he had a very specific tone and vision, and he was the lead actress was a producer as well, and so she was involved. And I was very much coming in to serve their project, just to make sure structurally this screenplay was kind of holding together and do a few little things there. And so we were in pre-production as it was going on. So a lot of things were already set, which, going back to what we were talking about earlier in post-production, it's so nice to have certain things just decided for you. There was that really allowed me to work pretty quickly through and get what became the shooting draft of the script done in time for them to roll cameras. They shot it in Indiana, and we saw the ball coming down the track, so to speak. Of like, we know the shooting date's approaching, but we were going after the rewrite on the script to make sure it was ready, and we hit it. It very much felt like I finished it. You know, gave it to someone, they grabbed it and ran to go make the movie. Now, of course, it's all just sending PDFs through the internet, but it felt like we just made it, and then they were off and shooting, and yeah, it was just a really great process. There was a real momentum to it because the project was already in pre-production, so that really helped kind of keep the drive going. And you hit a wall, and you just got to find a way around it. Whereas, you know, on spec work, it's a little more sometimes just kind of, okay, well, let me just go and have a think. And there just wasn't time to do that for this. You know, you hit the wall and you're like, all right, we got to find a way over, around, under it, something. And a lot of times those yielded, I think, some of the best sort of story moments in the film. Some of the solutions we ended up finding for some of the problems that came out.
So were you involved with any part of the production, any part of post? Did they have you around? Did they ask for your input? Or were you persona non grata?
No, I was, for shooting, I wasn't, I was on quote unquote standby, which, I mean, really just like I made sure I was available. And Andrew called me once and we talked about a thing, but he was pretty dialed into that. And it was a very fast shoot. So, so it almost felt like I forgot it was happening. And then he's like, yeah, anyway, we wrapped. And I was like, oh, geez, that's right. And then post-production, I wasn't too involved in. I saw a couple cuts, but I wasn't too hands-on there. But I think I ended up consulting on like 2 cuts, and I gave, you know, my thoughts, and then I can't even remember how many were taken and how many weren't, but it felt very collaborative. And I do remember watching the film, and I was like, oh wow, that was a really good moment there. That was a good cut. I don't remember that in the screenplay. And then Andrew was like, yeah, that's what you wrote. Like, that's the thing. So which is always the best feeling when it's so collaborative that you start to sort of forget who made what decisions, and it starts to the film starts to take on a life of its own, which felt very good. But I felt very participatory sort of throughout the process. It would just kind of pop up and, you know, be like, oh yeah, here's a cut. You get to give thoughts, which was really great.
So what's the pitch of the movie? And Ramesh, you can help him out.
Yeah, I'd be curious to hear how Ramesh pitched it. But basically, an immigrant mother in Middle America. We shot in Indiana, but it's not specified in the film. Her visa, she has to. Her visa gets. I forget the exact sort of legal things we end up doing in the movie, but basically it has to be renewed every 6 months. And it usually is just normally, but now it's just decided like not going to be renewed. And so she has 2 weeks to basically leave the country, or if discovered, she will be deported. Her daughter, who's a senior in high school, meanwhile, has just gotten into college. And she got into a state school, but because she's technically not a resident, she has to pay out-of-state tuition, which the family can't afford. And it's just her and her daughter. And so she can't afford it. And she basically sees the life and the dream she had for her daughter start to fade away. And so she tries to get a loan, tries to ask some other people for money. None of that really pans out. She's living a pretty isolated lifestyle, and so she turns to robbing banks. And it sounds a lot heistier than it is. There's a lot less heist and more just kind of watching this woman do everything she can just to fulfill the reason that in her mind she came to America for her daughter. And so we really wanted to play with that idea of, being a quote unquote illegal immigrant. What does that mean? But then, she does turn to robbing banks, which is illegal, but we really tried to push the idea to make the audience as sympathetic as possible. So we really felt like she had no other choice. And yeah, just sort of not put the idea on its head, but just look at the real, like, on the ground version of what it's like to be an immigrant in Middle America, and just the number of day-to-day obstacles that individually aren't huge, but just the constant sort of hoops that people that have this experience have to go through, and what they're willing to go through to help, in this case, her daughter. How did I do, Ramesh? Is that an accurate pitch?
Yeah, very good, actually. What I really liked about the story also was a lot of these stories you wind up in, they usually take place in like LA or New York or, some big city or a sort of a Texan border town. This one, you sort of plunked her down in, Middle America, as you said it. And it's, I found that really interesting. And she really does get cornered. That's her, and I do remember the bank robbery sequence. I'm like, please don't get caught. Please don't get caught.
Yeah.
Because you really want her to succeed.
Yeah. One of the issues we ran into was bank locations. The original script called for 4 banks. And I remember writing while Andrew was in Indiana on location scout, and he's like, David, I've tried everything. We can't find a 4th bank, and I asked all the questions that, of course, he had already gone to. I was like, well, can we double the location for can we shoot into one corner and then shoot into the other corner for the next day? And he's like, dude, I've looked at every option. Like, we got to rewrite the script so it has 3 banks. And so we went back in for the solution, and ended up being, I think it's one of the strongest parts of the film, because we're like, well, if we're running into this problem, let's make her run into the problem. Like, she has to return to a bank she's already robbed to try and get more. And it became one of the most like tenser scenes in the film, because it's like now she has a much higher chance of getting recognized. And she does, and I won't explain how she kind of gets out of it. But yeah, I
love that. But I love that how a production challenge forces a rewrite that creates the script's best moment, or one of the best moments. So yeah, and I think, again, those are the lessons. I always say that a screenwriter's education isn't truly complete until she has a film produced. Mm-hmm. Because you learn so much from that process. Just for exactly the example that you just gave would be one reason. There's so much to learn during the production, and even in post, or even if you're not involved in any of that, and you just go and you see your film, and then you see the way other people handled your material, maybe in ways that you never considered, that could be even better. And it's a learning experience for you. So I love hearing those stories, because to me, that's really what filmmaking is all about.
Yeah, it really is. Seeing it on screen with an audience, you really go, okay, that line didn't hit. I thought it would. And then you're like, oh wow, that line I didn't that was just, that was just to get from A to B. But, whether it was the actor or director, but someone on set turned that line and made, spun gold out of something that you were just kind of like, oh gosh, I hope everyone just kind of glances over this one, and now that for next time. It was huge for me. It was so great.
I would just want to point out something that you said, because I think it's interesting, and which is that you got this movie because you knew Andrew Morgan, and you had a little conversation with him, and it eventually led to his asking you, hey, do you want to rewrite this? And it reminds me a little bit of the story that Jay Arnold told us. He's the writer of The Kissing Booth and The Kissing Booth 2, the Netflix hit movies. And he got that first gig, The Kissing Booth 2, because he had a relationship with the director. And again, it comes down, so much of this business comes down to who you know and the relationships that you have and making yourself available. It's really an important story. And we just kind of breezed over it, but I really wanted to sort of drive that point home for our members.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, and I didn't, I didn't know Andrew until that meeting. It was, a mutual friend in Atlanta who I had worked with 5 years before that meeting even happened. When I was in post-production, and I did a little bit of producing there as well. And I was actually a producer on this project. That's where I met these two production designers, and it was them that put me in touch with him. And I do think it is so important that whatever you're doing, whatever's in front of you, that you really do, give it your all. Really try to do good work. Nothing is beneath you. That was the project I met them on. I won't go into details, but it was just kind of a mess of a commercial shoot, just like sort of rinky dink. And but we were trying to make something good, and obviously I made a good impression on these guys. They made a good impression on me, and so a relationship built out of that. We ended up working together in Atlanta a couple more times. I ended up consulting on their documentary, and then just for no reason at all, other than like, hey, we think you're cool. We know the guy Andrew that we think is cool. You two should meet up. They put us in touch, and then this happens. And I think that's how so many of these things, at least in my experience, a lot of the opportunities I've gotten have been stuff like that. And that's again why I say in regards to contests and competition, stuff like that, going in person and meeting people and making things together is far more valuable than any sort of specific win or anything like that, because the relationships, they will pay off eventually. And I know that sounds very mercenary, but you really can't calculate it, how your network will support you later. And if you're only trying to calculate it, you're not going to end up with the real, connections and relationships that you really need to sustain a life in this business. I say that again very early in my career, but it very much feels that way, especially after the whole experience with Long Gone By.
Yeah, I just think that there is nothing greater that a writer can do aside from writing than networking. It's really writing and networking, and then putting that network to work for you, because you will also work for it, and it's a two-way street. So it's just so important for writers to get out from their hovel, even outside of isolation, even if it means joining a Facebook group. Let's talk a little bit about your online presence, David, because you're on Twitter. So any of our members can search you out on Twitter. You want to share your handle with
yeah,
everybody?
it's my name. Luckily, it's just at David Wappel. I have a relatively unique last name, and so no one had it at the time when I made my Twitter handle. So you can find me there. And yeah, I'm probably like 90% are about writing and movies. And then the other, maybe if you like Lord of the Rings or Shakespeare, you'll also get some of that as well.
And then you do something on Zoom, is that correct? You want to talk about that as well?
I do. Yeah, I do a few things on Zoom. One is I have every morning I have a writer's cafe, and I'm just doing this while we're all kind of in this quarantine isolation type thing. But because I used to go write in coffee shops, fairly often, and obviously don't do that anymore. So on Zoom every morning I just have kind of an open room for people to join in if they want to write. Everyone's on mute, and we just write. And I put on some coffee shop kind of ambience noise, share it with everyone, and then we just write. And it's nice to be on your keyboard, and then you look up and you see a couple other writers just looking like that. Everyone is just kind of doing this, and then you see them write, and so it feels a little less isolating. But yeah, if you're a writer, you're welcome to do it. Even if you're not a writer, you're welcome to join and just get some work done in the morning. I go from 7 to 10 a.m. Pacific time.
How can they find you?
That one, they can, if they're interested, they can talk to me on Twitter or just on my website, which is just davidwappel.com. On my little miscellaneous tab, there's a little button to enter the room when it's time.
Cool, because I think that's actually a fun idea, and I think anything that writers can do to connect with other writers is really important. Not just because it could eventually lead to work, but you have people to commiserate with. You have people to bounce ideas off of. You have a reading circle. People that perhaps you come to trust that you can share your screenplays with. So it's just so important. So yeah, maybe join David in that coffee clutch. Of his.
Yeah.
Mr. Ramesh, you want to take the floor?
Yeah. Can you talk to me or tell us about your writing process? How do you when you start a script, do you outline? Do you write scenes? Do you just wait till it's all in your head and then just start writing? What's your process?
Sure. I do treatments mostly. There's something about a treatment that forces me to write the story out in a real way. Outlines, I would always end up tricking myself that I knew more about the story than I did whenever I would do outlines, because I'd be like, oh yeah, this is the scene where she goes to the bank, and then I'd go to write it and I was like, wait, what? But what happens there? I hadn't even thought of it, and all of a sudden I'm on the page, and I find the screenplay format when you're writing it, I actually find not a very creative. It doesn't induce creativity for me in a way that writing in prose does. And so doing a treatment, and I'll kind of just like rework a treatment over and over until I feel like, wow, that's going to be a good movie. I should turn that into a screenplay, which is of course the intention from the beginning, but that's very much the stage I'm looking to get to. And another benefit of that for me is that treatment also becomes a very useful tool when the screenplay is done as a pitching tool. It is really nice to I can send that out, and it's a much easier way for people to get a sense of the project without having to read the whole screenplay. So the treatment, there's something about that proper prose version of it that just forces me to think through all of it. And so I know once that reads really great, I feel very confident this will translate into a really, really nice screenplay. And I think it leaves plenty of opportunities for discovery along the way in the nooks and crannies. But maybe it's going back to sort of my philosophy degree in undergrad, where there's something about knowing the ending that I really like. I don't like sort of exploring. I like building to a clear conclusion. So I think that process works for me really well.
And are the treatments detailed? How long are these treatments? Are we talking 5-10 pages? Are we talking 50-60 pages? What's the
probably around like 20 to 25 by the time it's done.
Okay. By the way, I hate reading treatments, just so you know. I hate reading treatments, but I get it, especially for a writer. I think it's a really good tool.
Yeah, The way I kind of do it is I try to go kind of wide view in closer. So a lot of my early ones, I'll still have the whole story, but it might only be in like 10 pages. And the first one is I just try to see if I can fit the story on one page. And I know that if that page moves me, if the broad strokes, if those themselves are moving, then once it starts getting bigger, those broad strokes will, as long as I deliver on them, as I expand it, it will continue to be moving. So it gets larger as it goes on, but at any point I can kind of go back and say, well, where's the last, I just want my 10-page version of it. And yeah, it's not going to be as detailed, but it still has the whole thing. So it's like, depending on who I'm talking to, who I'm working with, I can send that, or I can even go back to that one page. I'll actually continue to work on these even as I'm doing the screenplay to make sure that they accurately reflect what I'm doing. If I make any big changes in the screenplay, although usually I don't, but if I do, I'll go back and I'll make sure that those treatments actually reflect what I have, so that by the end of the process, not only do I have a full screenplay, but I have kind of like, I have my one pager, I have a pretty good synopsis, and then I have like a detailed treatment of my story, and then I have the screenplay itself, and all of those documents come in handy, you know, depending on what you're doing once something is starting to move.
Where do you stand on log lines? Because, you know, I'm like this log line nut, and yet there are a lot of people who just hate them. So where do you stand?
I love them. I tell all my friends, and maybe I shouldn't be saying this because now a bunch of people on Twitter and Facebook are going to reach out to me to play with their log lines. But I'm like, you ever have any like log line questions? Like, I love tinkering with them. Not like I'm some, you know, wonderful log line expert, but like I just think they're so fun to play with, to really accurately get to the story. And so I'll tinker with it for days. Just, you know, I'll be like, this one adjective, it's still not quite there. There's a sharper word for it, and I'll just, you know, find it and search it. So I'm a huge fan of log lines. Again, just to go back to that idea of like the 10,000 foot view, like it should be moving from that level. And so if a log line isn't engaging, then like you're done. The script probably isn't engaging. The story isn't, and it's not. I should say, if the log line is accurate. Sometimes the log line doesn't seem interesting, but it's not accurate yet. It still doesn't capture everything about the film. So if you get a log line that does, and it works, then the story's going to work. I
agree with that. Ramesh, what do you think?
You talked about that you write in prose, and you know, I've read your other script too, The Last Farm, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And
see, Ramesh is a good friend to have, huh, David? Look,
talk about friendships and how they're you know paying off. Look, I'm meeting you guys through this, so.
And he's going to read your scripts. Like, I won't read anybody's scripts. I'm so grumpy about it. So look at Ramesh.
It was a lot of fun to read. It's a great story, but also what I really enjoyed was how you told it and your action lines. And you know, there was a certain style to your writing where you used sound, and you used very rarely did you go over 3 lines for action. It was mostly 1 or 2. And I was just wondering, has your writing style evolved from when you first started to sort of where you found yourself now? Yeah. And what was that process like?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'd say Last Farm is really the script that it happened on. I wrote the screenplay, and I wrote an early draft before I moved to LA, and then I moved to LA and I sort of did another version. I was like, I think this is ready to kind of get in front of people. And so I was relatively new to LA at the time, and I had made a few friends, and one friend of mine, she helped me set up a little table read with a combination of actors and writers. And it was a group that she had been involved with, and so we read it and we're ready for to talk about it after. And even before we got to the end, to the talking portion, we're reading it, and it read so slow. I was just like, I was embarrassed. I almost stood up and said, guys, let's just stop, because it felt so tedious to get through, because my action lines were just so laborious, and you know, I was writing in mostly proper, you know, perfect prose, and it just really was not clicking. And the main the main takeaway I got from that after all the talking about it was like, I think this is a good story, but we can't get to it. It's just, you know, it's not a good read. And so I really went back and I said, before I even go into any of the story things that came up in that table read and any of the story things that people were bringing up, I was like, I'm just going to go back and I'm going to rewrite every single word of this, not change anything, but just change how I'm telling it. And I think just forcing the kind of putting those blinders on and saying that is the thing that I'm looking at now forced me to really dig into what happens when a reader is reading a script and what is happening in their brain when words are triggering images and stuff like that. And so I got really analytical with it, really specific, and yeah, the script that came out of it, that's the thing that people actually talk about the most is kind of the style and the visual ease with which you kind of see a movie just flowing through your head. So it was absolutely an evolutionary process because I got burned big time on a read that was not engaging at all.
Okay.
Can you talk about the specifics? Ramesh was telling me a little bit earlier about your sort of word choice and your use of nouns, and can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Well, one of the things that I realized when I was looking at this, and I was sort of trying to teach myself, well, how do I write action in a screenplay? I realized that like I had never really looked at it, you know, and all the sort of the books I had read before and the other scripts I had done, I'd never quite looked at this aspect of it. And I really realized that nouns and verbs are your biggest friends in a screenplay, and really the noun is what you will usually trigger images in people's minds. And you don't need much beyond that, but picking the right noun can help kind of orient a shot. And so I don't know what to call them. I kind of call them anchoring nouns, but whenever I'm writing an action line, I always try to think of, well, how do I want the audience to see this? Like, what would the director be saying? You know, hey, here's what we're going to look at. Here's the shot. And as the more you can kind of front load that noun to explain that shot, the better it'll be. And so, or the more accurate it'll be to what you would picture. So, you know, if I say an apple sits on if I say picture an apple, you're probably not picturing an orchard because I'm just giving you, you know, all I'm saying is apple. So if I want, you know, a close up on an apple, I'll just say an apple sits on the table. If I want, you know, and say that's a picnic table in the middle of like a huge picnic, but I just want you to be that apple, then I should start with the apple. If this scene is a huge, giant picnic, and I want to see that wide shot first, then the biggest thing I'll say is like, you know, a picnic sprawls across a park. Even that, I might start with a park has a picnic happening inside of it. You know, I don't know, but these are the things that I would think about of like, what is the first noun, whether it's picnic, park, apple, because it's the same thing that's going on in this scene. But depending on how you want the reader to picture it, the earlier you can get that in there, the sooner they'll get on your wavelength of as far as what's being pictured. If that makes sense, hopefully.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. It's interesting because I think as a person who reads a lot of scripts, I want to do some thinking, I guess, but you know something? I really want the writer to do all the work. And I just want to be carried along. And yeah. And I don't, a script doesn't have to be sparse either. I was telling Ramesh earlier that I read 2 episodes of a hit streaming show that's about to go into its 3rd season. And I watched the show, but I'd never read any of the scripts. And the episodes were densely written. You know, so when I sort of opened up the document, I was like, oh boy, there's a lot of words on this page. But man, oh man, oh man, when I started, it was as if the writer had lassoed me and was just pulling me through the story. The words were not a chore. The fact that there were a lot of them, a lot of black on the page, was not an obstacle to the read, because it was as if I was on a wave just being carried along. And I really had to stop and say, wow, there is a talent to this. There really is a talent to writing a screenplay, to where the words can carry you along, not just the action and the actual elements of the drama in of themselves, but the way it's written. Fairly complex, I think, but I was really, and both scripts that I read, because I read, you know, it was episode 305 and episode 307, and they were both written by different writers, and perhaps the showrunner does the final pass, perhaps, I don't know. And but still, I just think it's so important, you know, this kind of stuff to engage the reader. It really is important, because the reader is the first person that's going to look at your screenplay, and the reader is anybody. It's anybody who's reading your screenplay. It's anybody. Yeah,
no, exactly. I think, and what you said about imagining, I think about that a lot, and really because my goal is always to make that screenplay represent the experience of watching it as closely as possible. And I think, you know, watching on screen is compared to, you know, reading a novel, you're probably the most passive. It's probably the most passive way of consuming content, and that's not to degrade it in any way, but it is, you know, I have no choice but to picture exactly what is on screen. So, you know, I read Harry Potter, and in my head, Harry looks how he does in my head until I see him on screen. And like, I mean, that's Daniel Radcliffe. My brain can't interpret that in another way. So I'm always trying to take as much off of the reader's imagination as possible. So if I'm describing something, I want to give something specific. I don't want to go overboard, but I've heard it described best as like a zip file. It's like, I don't want to say a looming castle sits on a hill. I want to say like, you know, the stony parapet pierces the something of the bluff. I don't know. You know, this is why I don't do it in real time. This is why I write. But you want to give very specific things. So it's like I'm not asking them to interpret castle. I'm saying like, look, it's a stony parapet, and I might even go back and say that's not specific enough. So I'm always looking for specifics that will then force the reader to picture what I'm going on. I'll never say, you know, we're in a dive bar. I will describe one or two details of a dive bar, so that then the reader goes, oh, this is a divey place. And they'll extrapolate the rest. But I've given them enough to just like sort of passively extrapolate, instead of saying, hey, you know, just why don't you decide what a dive bar looks like, and then fill that in. Because if they're doing that work, then they're not engaged in the story. You're engaging a different part of the brain, I think. So I'm always trying to like get in there as close to as possible, so that the reader is just like feeling it. If that makes sense, that's the goal. I mean, it's always you know, it's a struggle.
And feeling it is really important.
Yeah, exactly. So you're always trying to do that, and then kind of hide it beneath story. If the story's not there, then you'll, you know, it's all out the window. So we are talking about kind of, you know, these things do serve story. I could go forever describing a castle on a hill, but if that takes, you know, half a page, and like that was just something that the character in the train was passing, then it's like, what's the point? So you know, always that image should be serving story.
Yeah, I want to think about the larger issues. You know, I want to contemplate the conflict, or perhaps some of the moral dilemmas that are being proposed, or those are the things that I want to think about. I don't want to have to go back and read a description because it wasn't clear. And again, like, you know, I just like, I want all that work done for me.
Yeah.
And yet done in a compelling, entertaining way also. So
yeah.
There's so many dynamics involved in just writing a good script. There's so many dynamics. I think this is why a lot of people just can't get it right, because it's really hard.
It is really hard. Thank you for saying that. I always feel good whenever someone says that, because it is. And yeah, I think I hear a lot. You know, people are. I get the question a lot about, like, you know, directing the page and stuff like that. And one of the things you just reminded me of is, like, you're really you're trying to serve the audience, and so the you know, director, producer, cinematographer, anyone who's reading it, you want to try and get them to be thinking of it as an audience member without their knowledge. You know, because I have a friend who's a director of photography, and he'll watch a film and he can't help but respond to the shots and everything. Like, you know, he's talking about it and he's engaged with it, and that's what he brings to it. It's not like the film is saying, well, for the people out there that are into that stuff, we'll let them do it. And so it's like, why would we not do that in the screenplay? Why would we not put in things that, yes, a director will make a decision and an actor will make a decision, even sort of overriding your decision. And that's the whole point, because you at least got to get it in there so that anyone reading this can respond to it as an audience. Otherwise, you're writing for an audience of the people making it, but that's not actually who the audience of the ultimate project is going to be for, you know, the ultimate version of it. So you always got to write with that audience in mind while still serving the tools that everyone else that makes a film or TV show would be bringing to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Ramesh?
I take in your bio, you said you're a story analyst for management firms and production companies, and you also work one-on-one with writers. When you read work from new writers, amateur writers, what are some of the issues that you come across in their work that tend to be sort of common mistakes or problems you see?
One thing I see is scenes are scenes that are structured well, but there's no the characters are not taking different tactics to get their goal, and that's a very actory word. But, you know, so a character will go into a scene wanting something, and they'll try to do this thing, and it will either succeed or not based on the other character in the scene, and then the scene will be over. And it's interesting, but it's not as interesting as seeing them try something. Okay, that's not working. I'm going to try a different way. So you know, navigating in and around a conflict, I see that as a big thing. The ones that I think are doing really well, the characters feel more alive, even moment to moment within a scene.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what is up next for you? What are you doing now? What are your hopes, dreams, plans? What are you going to do when we're out of isolation? What's up next for David Wappel?
Yeah. I have a long list of things I want to do when I'm out of isolation. Near the top of which is go to a movie in a theater. But up next for me, writing wise, a couple things that, you know, may or may not go as it feels like it always is. But I'm working on. I'm finishing up my first original hour-long TV pilot. I've predominantly done features. I did a half hour, but it wasn't my original idea. But I collaborated with someone before. But this is my first original TV pilot. So I'll finish that up and then sort of, you know, see who's interested. And then actually, I may be doing another movie with Andrew Morgan. We've been in talks about getting the band back together, so to speak, to do something. And then I have a couple of feature specs that I'm trying to get out there as well. And I have projects in various states right now, but I don't know what my next one will be. I'm coming up to a point where I'm gonna be able to start on a new project. I think a new spec of my own, and I'm actually having trouble deciding between three ideas. there was a freedom earlier in my career, I should say earlier kind of before my career, of just, you know, kind of writing what I think I'll write this next. And now there's a lot more considerations. You know, what's the next best piece for me? What fits into what I've written and how people know me and what others are doing. And so I'm actually struggling a little bit to decide which my next one will be, what I'm going to kind of go after next.
Well, clearly, Ramesh is your biggest fan. I think when we're through here, you should pitch him to Ramesh and see what he thinks.
Exactly.
No, actually, it's, two things. One is, what prompted you to try a pilot? You know, you said you've been doing features all this time and you decided to do a pilot. And the other one, you talked about ideas. Do you sort of have a book of ideas? You sort of jot things down as you sort of go along, so you sort of remember these things? Or
yeah, I'll answer that one first. And you know, anytime I have an idea that I think might be interesting, like I'll write it down, just like note in my phone, and then I notice if sometimes I'll go back and I'll review my notes and I'm like, what did that even mean? I don't know what that is. So that idea I probably shouldn't pursue. But if I continue to have the same idea, if it starts to needle in my brain, then I start thinking like that might be something I should pay attention to. That's an idea I'm clearly interested in a deeper way, and not just the idea of I saw a thing and someone, you know, I said like that should be a movie. I'm like, oh, that would be a good movie. Write that down. The stuff that stays with me, that's when I know like I should probably look into what I'm interested in about that. And as far as the pilot, for features, I really like what I call like once in a lifetime stories. The idea of that what we're seeing in the film is probably the most unique experience of this person's life. So I'm probably not pitching myself well to franchise people, but you know, very, very once in a lifetime type stories. And as I was playing around with the idea that eventually became this pilot, I realized that there were multiple characters that I'm like, wow, I could structure a feature around this character's experience. I could do it around this character's experience. Like, they were all just endlessly interesting to me. And a friend of mine was like, well, you should just make it a TV show. You should, like, you know, you have the time and the space to tell those types of stories. And so I went for it. And it is it's a different ballgame for sure. Some things are, you know, translate story to story, but other things, there's a whole lot of considerations, particularly in a pilot, that I don't have to really deal with in features. There's something very comforting to me about it's in or out mentality of a feature film, and a pilot is very different because it's, you know, it's not just in or out. It's well, is it in the pilot or is it not in the pilot? Well, if it's not in the pilot, do I need to tease it for the show? Well, what does that even mean? I'm teasing it, like, you know, do I just put it in there, or how does it affect the story? It's very different. And it's been really great. It's been really rewarding for me. A chance to sort of, flex some different muscles and learn some different muscles too.
Have you finished?
Throw it all into the pilot. throw it all into the pilot.
That's what I'm learning.
I've read pilots that by the time I got to the end of it, there were like 36 characters. You know, because they figured they had to introduce everyone on the show to it. And,
well, you know, you certainly want to introduce, I think, just because you want to make the pilot as exciting as it can be. And I have read pilots where I'm like, wow, this is really great. And then when I see the pilot on air, 30% of the things that were in the pilot screenplay are not in the pilot episode, because they were in the pilot screenplay script simply to have this just like amazing pilot. And then those beats are yanked out and they're thrown into episode 4, episode 7. I see that a lot. It happens so much.
Yeah.
So is your pilot... No, go ahead.
Ramesh. No, please.
No, is your pilot done? Have you finished writing it?
I think I'm close.
Ramesh wants to read it, David.
I
will absolutely send it to him.
He's to read it, so you got to get that thing done.
I'll read it.
No, I'll send it to him. I actually I went back to sort of do a page one rewrite on. I have a draft. Ramesh, I can send you the draft I have. It's terrible. But I ended up going back and re-breaking it, actually, doing a kind of a new pile. So I can send you the old version. And that one was well done, but yeah, I wasn't happy with it. It ended up being I read it and I was like, yeah, I think it's solid, but it's not, like, I wouldn't watch this. I'm not interested in it anymore. A lot of the decisions I was making, I was solving problems that I thought I had, and the solutions were taking me further away from what I wanted. And one of the benefits of spec work as opposed to assignment work is that you do have a little bit of artistic control, at least before it gets out there and you're starting to engage others in it. And so I'm not known for TV, and so it was often friends' advice. They're like, well, just take another swing at it, like, don't force it. And if you're gonna put art out into the world, like, make sure it reflects like your artistic sentiment. And I was like, yeah, but isn't this good? And she's like, oh yeah, I mean, it's good, but like, what happens if this does, if something starts happening to it, you get some traction, and all of a sudden you're like on this path that artistically you're just not into. It's like, that's just not a place you want to be. So yeah, I took the advice and went back, and I'm feeling much better about where I'm at now with it.
Good. I think so much of being a real writer is about knowing when your stuff works and doesn't work. So often writers will ask, how do I know when my script is ready to show people? And my answer is like, that's your job to know that. And like, if you don't know that, then you're not evolved enough yet as a writer, because you really have to be able to look at your stuff and know, okay, like, some of this works, some of this doesn't work, or this is trash. Like, I just spent 6 months writing garbage and I'm going to rewrite it, or something, I'm going to move on. But that really is part of what it means to be a professional writer.
Yeah, what you just said about moving on, I think is so true. Because there are some things that just like you get out of you and it's just like not clicking, and you could spend months, sometimes years, like trying to rework it, and the best thing you could do is just to move on to something else and evolve and learn as a writer. And then years later you might come back to it and boom, you can knock out, like, you can revisit that idea, and what was so hard to figure out at the time, now you've learned through other things, and you can knock it out. There's nothing like moving on to another project that really, at least for me, helped me learn, oh, okay, this is a problem that I was having with this story, or oh, this is just a problem I have. This is something I need to work on. And you can't get that perspective if you're just locked into one idea that you're just keep trying to jam it through, and it's like not working. I started going down that road a little bit, and I had some good friends be like, David, put that one away. Just you can return to it later. But I have seen other writers that are on one thing for what feels like a very long time.
Yeah, like decades. And I'm not exaggerating. Decades. So we'll see log lines in our group that I remember reading, like, when we first started the group 9 years ago. Like, wait a minute, this thing is still around?
Yeah.
So there's nothing wrong with reworking something, but maybe you should be writing other things as well.
Yeah, and I think another thing is, like, that's not always to say that the script or the logline isn't good or isn't working, but it's like, I mean, it still is art, and at sometimes, like, you might have a great script that just isn't resonating with others because the art isn't resonating with others, And like you can't control that. You know, it's like artists trying to sell a painting in a gallery and they're refusing to put other stuff up. It's like no one's saying it's bad. They're just saying, you know, that's not for me. And like you've got to move on to other things so that you have more to show and to work on and to get out there. It's not always, you know, you might end up just rearranging furniture for days when actually just like, look, no one wants to buy that house, and it's just not going to happen right now. So stop tinkering with it.
Do you have a quota for yourself in regards to, all right, I'm going to write one script this year, I'm going to write one feature and one pilot? Do you set yourself up that way at all?
Each year I set specific goals. They're different each year depending on what else I have going on and what else I want to do. Like Ramesh was saying earlier, I do work one-on-one with writers now, and so I have been working on that business a little bit. So and I'm looking at other opportunities, what I can do to continue to sort of fulfill that part of me. And so depending on what I have going on is different, but I do think it is important to set goals in general, but also specifically I do think about, you know, what I want to write, what I want to produce this year, even if I don't know, and I don't mean produce in I shouldn't say produce, I just mean create what I want to create this year. Because sometimes it's like, you know, I'm going to do this many features and you know, last year was the pilot, and I did that relatively late in the year, and so that's why it's kind of coming back around this year. But also, you know, podcast ideas, and I have 2 book ideas that I've been working on, and as well as like other fun projects. I rewrote Raiders of the Lost Ark as like a Shakespearean, just for like in iambic pentameter, just for fun. And so stuff like that, I think it's important to also be doing.
Well, you're a writer. So you're writing, and you're an artist, and you're a creator, and you're diverse, and I think that's really important. And you know, I work at a talent agency, and I can tell you that is something that, especially where I come from, that we look for. When we're looking for talent to represent, we want people who are diverse. If you come in and say, yeah, you know, I want to write plays, I want to write novels, I want to write for podcasts, I want to do this, I want to do that, a big agency like ours can service people like that. You know, I mean, I'm not saying that a brand new writer is going to get repped at WME or CAA, but generally speaking, any rep really wants that. They want that diversity, because they want to see that this is what you do and this is what you are. So somebody who would rewrite Raiders of the Lost Ark through Shakespeare's voice, which is nutty as that sounds, which I kind of love, by the way, and Ramesh will read it. You know, that's the kind of thing that like people are like, okay, this is somebody who really takes his craft seriously.
Yeah, when I interned, doing internships when I first moved to LA, and yes, after working in post production in Atlanta, having a full job, I did do internships in LA. So again, no job is beneath you. But yes, starting a new career, did internships, and that's one of the things I learned reading for a management company and interning there was, you know, it was I was always looking at the script and only the script, and I in the conversations with the managers when we were talking about what I had read and stuff like that, I learned so much more about like it's about the voice that's in there that's more important, and it has to be good enough to be read. So it's not just like, you know, it's not a voice without craft. The craft is just to get to a point where now you can see the voice, and that artistic voice is what's so important, and finding out what they're into, where the sentiments are, to see, because that is what is most unique. Because anyone can learn craft, anyone can learn how to do a screenplay. That just helps you get your voice out there. These two are not sort of mutually exclusive, which is the way I think that sometimes conversations seem to sort of pit them against each other. But I think craft is a way to get your artistic voice out into the world, and that is what is so important to hang on to. And that is why I think craft is so important. Why I focus on and fascinate myself with it so much is because it's just like, well, those are the things that I'm using to try and get what I want to think and say out into the world. So that's why I end up obsessing over things like anchoring nouns and stuff like that.
Well, we're glad that you could meet with us today and obsess over some of those things.
Me too.
So
I have
thank you for your.
I have one more question.
I mean, here I am
Yes,
trying
Ramesh,
to do like a
you can read my
really
script.
eloquent outro, and now
Sorry.
Ramesh
No,
just screw it up on me.
I'm sorry.
So it's all good. It's all good, baby. Because I think you're sexy, right? I think you're sexy. Go ahead. Go ahead.
You work with writers, and you obviously give your work to writers. How do you deal with getting notes and also giving notes? And what have you learned with the process? Like by giving people notes, have you learned anything about the notes you get and how you react to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I used to think, well, like, okay, I need to give notes and I need to be as objective as possible. But I think the more I do it, the more I learn that actually that's kind of a fool's errand, because our art is subjective and we are subjective, and so it's not like I need to be thinking about how others might subjectively interpret this thing I just read. I actually need to be constantly engaging with myself about my own biases and my own things and what I'm bringing to the table when I read something. And I think good notes happen at the intersection of that. I need to really be aware of what I'm feeling and thinking when I am giving notes to someone, so that they understand exactly why I had the response I did, my pitches, if any, for how to maybe avoid that response or to stoke it further if it's something we want. And so that's actually why when I work one-on-one with writers, I now do just video calls. I stopped doing, for the most part, written notes, because you really need, I think, that real-time conversation to have a really deep and productive notes call, so that we can really interpret, so that I understand what the intent is. Because I think agreeing on the target is probably the most important part of getting notes. I was just so tired of getting notes back where I feel like the reader missed what I was going for, and that it's not the reader's fault. It's probably my fault. It wasn't clear enough, so of course they're not going to get what I'm going for. And then I feel terrible because they just gave some pitches and a really great solution to something that is actually going further away from what I wanted, and now they did all this work because I wasn't clear in the in my writing yet. So if I can do that and we can clear that up in real time, I can say, okay, look, this scene, something's going on here. What do we want to be feeling here? What do you want to be doing? What are the characters going through? Like, we can just talk about it and really pinpoint the problem. I think good notes is more about diagnosing the problem than a solution. And I think a lot of, I've just been on the receiving end, and earlier also on the giving end of too many solution-oriented note sessions. And I think so much is really about diagnosing the problem, because it's really up to the writer to solve it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think my approach is often to try to facilitate solutions, right? So to try to talk with the writer and help the writer through to come up with the solutions. Because there are a lot of writers who do get sort of miffed if you just sort of point out the issues and then don't help them out on the other end.
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, it's, writers handle notes differently, as do people who give notes. And some people are just better at giving notes than others are, just like there are some writers that are better at taking notes and executing notes. But there is a little bit of a gift, I think, in being able to give notes, and a little bit of a gift in being able to take notes as well. So somebody like you who does both, you have the experience on both sides of the table. which I think is very valuable. Yeah.
It's definitely helpful. The more notes I get, the more I feel more comfortable giving them, for sure. So if you're you know, reading a bunch and giving notes, it's really generous of you and it's very helpful. You should also be getting them from people so that you really are understanding what's going on. Also, you got to get notes from people for your work to get better. So it's one of those things. I always think that it's the job of someone giving notes to meet the script where it is and see where it could be and bridge that gap, not meet the script where it is and say, well, here's why it was falling short. You always want to be elevating it rather than kind of denigrating it. So that's the mindset I think that everyone should be in when they're giving notes. They can say, this story is not, when this is in its final version, it's going to be amazing. I'm going to see that, instead of saying, look, this isn't good right now. It's like, well, sure, they know that. Otherwise, the writer probably wouldn't be getting notes. So yeah, you always want to be, I think, validating the ideas and just helping the script reach the level of the ideas that are in it. I get to read something where the ideas aren't like amazing. It's always, you know, maybe they're just not explored yet. It's just not there yet in the script. And people need to be pushed. I need to be pushed a lot to get to that. There's always headroom, I find. And it always takes someone else to help show you really how far you can go with what you're into.
Well, folks, you heard it there, because I got to tell you, man, I'm not as optimistic as David is. So you better look him up on Twitter, people. You better look him up because, boy, you know, maybe I'm just like old and grumpy. Well, I am old and I am grumpy. But hey, man, good for you. That is a really good attitude. It really is. So Ramesh, am I allowed to close?
Yes, you are. You are not allowed to close.
You know, I don't want to keep David here all day. He has scripts to write.
I know.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So tip members, look up David on Twitter, follow him there, and reach out to him. And just, hey, man, thanks so much for taking the time today to share your experience and your wisdom with us. We really do appreciate it.
Experience, sure. Wisdom, who knows? But if I gave you any. But yeah, happy to do it. Thank you so much, guys.
So, thanks, David.